the FBI knew. But it's also clear that many on the U.S. Capitol Police Force, the frontline officers who protect the Congress, did not know. They had no idea what was coming. And because they didn't know, they were completely unprepared for what happened that day. That is a very strange failure of communication, and it has never been explained. To understand more about the response to January 6th inside the Capitol, we sat down with a man called Tarek Johnson. Johnson served as a Capitol Hill police officer for 22 years. On the day of the protest, he says he was responsible for securing the certification of the presidential election. If there is anyone at the very heart of the January 6th story, it's former Capitol Police Lieutenant Tarek Johnson. And yet, for some reason, the January 6th committee never called him to testify.
My voice was one of the first ones you hear on the audio transmission, so I did expect to get an interview at some time, but no, it didn't happen. I guess the focus was on Donald Trump.
According to Johnson, no one answered his numerous pleas for help over Capitol Police radio frequencies. Johnson says he, quote, didn't hear anything on the radio. According to Johnson, Yogananda Pittman kept vital information about the protests from frontline officers like him. Pittman was the assistant chief of the department in charge of intelligence operations.
We should have been better prepared that day, and we could have been better prepared that day if the information was disseminated like it was supposed to be.
Once protesters moved inside the building, Johnson's first concern was the safety of senators. His job was to protect them. In rising panic, he called over the radio for direction and assistance. Even now, 2 years later, he is baffled by the response he got.
I was requesting permission to evacuate the Senate side, the Senate chambers, because I had a clear line of sight to get them out the Senate door, and I didn't get permission. Dispatcher called a couple times to see if I could get permission. No response.
With Yogananda Pittman and his other supervisors unresponsive, Johnson says he decided to begin the evacuation of senators himself.
The person that I thought was going to authorize the evacuation didn't do it. I wanted to get those members of Congress out as quickly as I could. That's why I initiated, those evacuations. Me being disciplined, it wasn't as important as not getting the members of Congress and their staff to safety.
Footage we reviewed seems to bolster Johnson's account. The video shows Johnson conducting the evacuation of senators from the chamber. Yet Tarek Johnson was not rewarded for what he did. He was punished. A photo emerged of Johnson wearing a MAGA hat outside the Capitol. That picture cost him his career.
Sometimes I look at it and thank you, God, for blessing me with this hat. And sometimes I'm like, wow, I wish this hat never came in my life.
A Biden voter, Johnson says he donned the hat in an effort to rescue fellow officers he believed were trapped in the building.
I figured if I had the hat on, it'd be easier for me to navigate my way through the crowd. It was basically self-preservation and de-escalation.
Wow.
And I needed to get up those steps. I couldn't say what would have happened walking through that crowd without it.
But for the crime of wearing a Trump hat, Johnson found himself suspended. Ultimately, he resigned from the force and lost his pension. He now works part-time as a furniture mover. Yogananda Pittman, meanwhile, thrived. 2 days after January 6th, Nancy Pelosi elevated Pittman to acting chief of the Capitol Police. Late last year, Pittman took a high-paying job as the head of security at UC Berkeley,
What a piece of
which
shit.
is right outside Pelosi's congressional district. Berkeley announced Pittman's hiring with unqualified
Hope
praise
Pelosi
for
chokes on her ice cream.
steadfast commitment to social justice. Pittman herself boasted about her heroic performance on January 6th. Her department, she said, quote, saved democracy that day. We reached out to Yogananda Pittman for comment, but she didn't get back to us. Tarek Johnson spent 22 years as a Capitol Police officer. On January 6th, he says he was in charge of securing the certification of the presidential election. So he was right in the middle of it. If anyone was, Tarek Johnson was. Here's more of our sit-down interview with
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because
Ms. Johnson. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for
I don't think it ever
So
got
from the outset,
certified.
here's how it looked. We now know that huge parts of the federal government were aware that there was going to be something big happening at the Capitol on January 6th. They knew there were going to be big demonstrations there. And they prepared for that. But the Capitol Police, on which you served for 22 years, did not seem prepared at all. And of course, that would be the front line in preparedness. Was the Capitol Police prepared for that day?
The frontline officers and supervisors were not prepared for that at all.
When you said, oh, so you had no idea it was coming?
We knew that there was going to be a demonstration that day, but we had no idea that we were going to be facing what we faced on that actual day.
So things start to fall apart, people stream in the building, you call upwards in the command chain, help me, you don't get a response, what do you do next?
So around 2 o'clock, it may have been a little bit after 2 o'clock, I hear a officer say that the Capitol was breached. So I ran inside of the building. I ran, to assist. I knew that that location of where that first breach occurred was near where the members of Congress would be locked in. We initiated a lockdown, so that means the chamber doors on the Senate side and the House side were locked. So that means the members of Congress would be safe inside those locked rooms.
Yes.
So I ran over to the House side first to make sure that those doors were locked. Then I ran over to the Senate side to make sure those doors were locked. So I asked over the radio and I say something to the effect that we need direction. We have hundreds of people inside of the building. What do you want us to do? We need some direction. I heard no response. No response. So, at that
must have been
particular
AT&T.
How could nobody respond?
Nobody responded.
At some point you put on a MAGA hat.
Yes. Now,
I think we have it. I think we have the actual MAGA
yes,
hat.
we actually do have the MAGA hat. I have it here in plastic, so here it is. Let me take
J6 it
yes,
says.
I labeled it J6.
So tell us why you put the hat on and how that was related to your suspension.
That's what got me national attention was the wearing the MAGA hat. They were officers. We had a distress call that there were approximately 10 or 11 officers, I can't remember the exact number, were trapped at the top of the rotunda steps. So I enlisted the help of some CDU officers to help me go up the steps. And I kept yelling that all the way up the steps, giving people high fives, trying to make it up the steps to get to guys. And as I was going down, there was a demonstrator on, I believe he was on my right side of me, so he reached over, I didn't know what he was doing, I didn't know if he was gonna hit me, and he put the MAGA hat on my head. So as I was still trying to walk down the steps, then he asked for the hat back, and I said, well, I would like to keep it because the hat's gonna help me.
It's your passport through the crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Capitol Police is by definition nonpartisan. It serves both parties in the Congress. It protects members of both parties.
100%.
And it has to be that way. In the wake of January 6th, you saw what looked like partisanship at the Capitol Police. Did you perceive that?
I'm still shocked because as a Capitol Police officer, we even had we had our chief of police at the time. His name was Stephen's son, and he called for all the officers who was at work that day. He called for everybody to come in, and we all went to Emancipation Hall in the CVC, and and this was during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations.
Yes.
And he told us that as Capitol Police officers, we need to stay neutral. We need to stay neutral, period. So we were like, okay, that's what we do. Because we protect Democrats, we protect, Republicans, we protect everybody. So we need to stay neutral. So then after January 6th, you had some police officers who wasn't neutral, didn't seem neutral
At all.
Yeah, and that was an issue, yes.
So, I mean, that devalues the credibility of Capitol Police, doesn't it, if they're allowed to be partisan in public?
They're supposed to be neutral, period.
Since you were there on January 6th, what did you think of the job of the January 6th committee? Do you think that they were honest in the way they approached it? Do you think they got to the truth?
I prayed almost daily that they would get to me. I was never asked to testify, and if you listen to the radio,
You were never asked by the January 6th
I
committee?
was never asked by anybody connected to the January 6th committee to testify. I ask myself why every day, and every day I might have a different answer, but I looked at what pretty much they focused on Donald Trump and not the failures of the Capitol Police.
Why do you think they were there?
I think that some people there had planned on being violent. Some people may have turned violent after what they were going through. I think that people wanted to support their president. Some of those people wanted just to support him, and some of those people didn't commit violence, and some of those people didn't plan on it.
We haven't answered every question about what actually happened on January 6th. Far from it. There's so many mysteries from that day. But one thing we know for certain is that the story they told you about it, a pat tale of good versus evil, an insurrection with no guns that took place at the U.S. Capitol, those were lies. And they were lies told for a very specific purpose.
They absolutely were.
Of course, the people in power wanted more power, and they got it on the basis of those lies. But in the process, many lives were destroyed, and some people are still in jail tonight, not having had their constitutionally guaranteed moment in front of a
This
jury
is March
of their
7th,
peers. They haven't
2023.
been put on trial yet, and they're still rotting. Julie Kelly is the one journalist in this country who's been following this very closely. She wrote a book on it. January 6th, the Democrats used the Capitol protest to launch a war on terror against the political right, which is a perfect summation of what actually happened. Julie Kelly joins us now. Julie, thanks so much for coming on. So it dawned on us as these tapes made very clear that the story we've been presented is an absolute fabrication. It's a lie. It's a fraud. That people may still be in jail on the basis